that you can just click a button and it will automatically update all of those files on your OSF account, so that it's perfectly integrated into how it is in work. You don't have to keep going back to the website. And so there's many different technologies that, if they're brought together, become much more powerful for assisting rather than getting in the way of the daily work that we're trying to do to promote the kind of science that we want to have. So what I'll close with is just a note on what I think the ultimate implication of this is. My presumption is that most scientists want to do it right, that they want to practice openly if they can be rewarded for doing so, that they want to get answers that are answers that will hold up over time. And there's many things that we face in doing our science that can lead us to not do it quite as right. Like the pressures of publication, the pressures of reward, the pressures of getting a job and getting tenure and everything else can lead people to do things that are suboptimal. And so if one is doing it right, is not taking advantage of those practices in a system where some people may be on steroids, right? They're actually using these analytic practices to give themselves an advantage. Then the only way to do it right and get rewarded for it is to do it publicly. Is for people to know that you're not taking advantage of those degrees of freedom, that you're not doing extra things that make yours look better than it actually is. So that people can say, oh, well, the work is a little messier, it's not quite as clear, but boy, they're doing good science, because I can see it. And so I think openness, the ultimate incentive for it, is that it can reward people that are doing excellent practices, regardless of what the results are that they obtain. Because we can't control the results. That's part of what science is that's what we don't get to control. And yet that's the primary driver of our reward system as it's currently structured. So I will end with that. Thanks a lot for your attention and time.
If you, please.
What do you think about the reviewing system? I think that should also change, for example, that the journals have only reviewers just to check whether it's done in a scientific manner, in a method. And then to put it on some open sites where anyone can, for example, make like a blog. Ask questions, you can answer, everyone can see it, and then by the time, it would filter out the good work. Because sometimes you know it, I'm sure you know it yourself, that today reviewers, because it's very ungratifying, they do it, they are also busy and they do it like in 5 minutes, or they're not expert enough for. So I think that should somehow, die out, and in the same direction as this, to make the quality of science. Because often when you're doing this messy and not really, if you're on some grounds that are not really accepted and recognized, it's very difficult to publish in good journals, They just don't recognize what you're doing. It's nothing like they're used to, and they just, So I think this would be somehow better.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And in addition to everything you said, good reviewers aren't rewarded for being good reviewers in the current system, because nobody knows that they're good reviewers.
Right.
So if you can make that public too, then those great reviewers can actually earn reputation for being amazing people. I mean, I read some reviews that are amazing. They're great scholarship of their own. And the only people that get to read it are me as another reviewer and the people that wrote the article and everything else. And that should be part of the record. It is a contribution. So we have 2 scientific utopia papers. The first paper is on exactly the issue that you raised, is the publishing process itself, how we can reform peer review system, publishing in general, making things more accessible. And then the second paper is sort of what I summarized here. So in that first paper, you'll see arguments very much aligned with what you said. Yes, please.
With the value of replication, one would think that when you have a high impact paper, so many people like it, I read it and say, wow, this guy is really clever, I never thought of that, I could maybe do something on those lines. And then I may not replicate that experiment exactly, but I do my own changes, and by that I find out if it doesn't work or not. So if there are 10 more people, at least that is how I imagine good high-impact papers are. If there are more people who do that, and they all do not do an exact replication, but do other things with it, and by seeing that it works, then you don't need to replicate the original exactly, because you wouldn't find your own variations as successfully as it. That's why I think at least part of the high quality papers are. Others are papers which are really hard to replicate and nobody bothers because it's so complicated, because it's so juicy, it gets recognition. Those may be, I think, more troublesome.
That's right.
Papers than these, which where people work upon them and then
right, and they make extensions, and it's very clear that it's easy.
That
to
the basic result is okay,
That's
because
right.
the others wouldn't be.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that I agree with that. The challenge is that it's not always clear how to tell the difference between the two of these, where people are using it productively versus trying to replicate it but not able to do so. And so the example that's been discussed a lot in social psychology recently is social priming effects. For example, the main classic example is John Barge and his colleagues priming people to think about old and then timing how quickly they walk down the hall after the study. And they walk slower after being primed with concepts related to oldness and not. Right, this is, and there's many different examples in the priming literature about different ways that we can prime these social concepts and influence behavior, and that's very much part of my regular substantive interest. But researchers that were skeptical of this area have had a lot of trouble getting that original result again. And so even though priming as a concept is almost certainly true, right, there's so many examples of how it is we can prime these things and do stuff. That general concept is true. But it's not yet clear if that particular way of doing it works. And so there's a lot of debate about at which level does it matter? Does it only matter that the general idea is true, or do some of these specific instances need to be true? And if people are never doing a direct replication of any of the individual instances, then it's possible for us to build a literature where we have some confidence in a general concept, but none of the individual instances are actually true. They all leverage chance. And so that's a challenge of no direct replication at all. But in general, I very
How
much.
specific is it to social psychology? One would not expect something like that to happen in physics, for example, that one trusts one general idea and then does other things and never replicates this basic thing. I can't think of an example.
Yeah. So when I talk to physics
Or
colleagues,
psychology in general. Not
right? Yeah. So it isn't just psychology in general. Physics may be the most advanced in the dependence on replication. And the advantage that physics has in this particular regard is that they have for parts of physics, they have a very strong model. Such strong expectations, given especially with quantum particles and particle physics in general, that violations of the model are really interesting. And so they're highly dependent on replication in order to confirm those assumptions, but then when they're not confirmed, that is immediately interesting because the model is so strong. In psychology and social sciences and many of these other disciplines, we don't have a strong model. Should it come out this way or not? Do you call your, what is the way you're defining personality? Well, there are lots of ways to define it. So how can you say that this violates in some fundamental way this theory versus that theory? They're all adaptable. So it's much harder when we don't have concrete bits that we can call our constructs to have an easy time with replication and disconfirmation. So physics is more mature in that regard, and they have things that are actually physical units as they exist. But even in physics, this challenge is true at the margins. At those areas of physics where they are still mucking around, they don't have a strong model of how it should work. And they have the same reward structures that we do. They need to publish, they need positive results, because they're doing stuff where no one's really sure if that's going to happen. And so in biology, for example, this is pervasive. There isn't as strong models. There's particular strong models, right? Theory of evolution is a strong model. But many of the areas of biology, they're still mucking around. like we are. And so the same problems exist there too. Yes.
Just got the idea for this software and the site. It could be very good if you could tag somehow your study as replication, whether direct or minor variations, so that you can follow all other people doing on the same topic.
That's right.
So same replication of same original study.
Yeah, that is the intent. In the short term, it's easy just to add tags of, so you can discover it as linked to other things. In the longer term, the idea would be that people use that forking mechanism. So you'd just be able to trace the history of what studies are being used or being replicated or extended in interesting ways. And then the network analysis would show you the relations among things. We also have lots of imaginations about using network analysis for giving people information about research that they should be paying attention to. Right? So we have, there's much more research than we can possibly attend to. But if everyone is using a common system and all of these things are linked in some interesting ways, then it's possible through, just like Google sometimes gives you ideas of links to things you didn't anticipate. They could say, look at these two other researchers. They're doing things that are very similar to what you've been working on. You might want to look at their materials. And so it offers some new opportunities for connections that isn't possible in our current way of organizing information. Yeah.
I'm just thinking all the time about, do you have some fears maybe, since I see a hyperproductivity of papers in these strict criteria, and now if you would loosen up a little bit or put an open system, would you be a bit afraid that hyperproductivity might become hyper and this network might be so complex that it would put more chaos into the system than it would?
Yeah, this is a concern that many people raise, is that I already feel overwhelmed. You're really going to open the floodgates and make everything available, including the bad stuff? How will I figure out what the good stuff is? What I should be paying attention to? I don't know the answer. My intuition, well, I guess the first thing to say is that even if it happens where it becomes even more information, we're already confronted with a situation where research literature from our personal point of view is functionally infinite. There are 1.3 million papers published every year in science. Not Science magazine, Science generally. It's much smaller in science than anything. But that's a lot. And there's an estimate, a paper in 2010 estimated that there are 60 million total scientific articles since the first scientific article in 1665. And half of those were produced in the prior 25 years. So the rate of scientific production is gone through the roof. It is astronomical. So we're already overwhelmed.
Is there any estimate for psychology? How many psychology papers are published per year?
Yeah, I don't know the answer for psychology in particular, but I think that this is pervasive across fields. It's a good question. I don't know what the answer is. But the challenge that we face, I think, are two distinct ones. One is search and filter. How can we possibly deal with this overwhelming amount of information? And the good thing about search and filter is that the search companies, the internet, is doing a great job of the work for us. Right? If you go on Google and you search for things, you almost always find it, and pretty quickly. We don't have those same mechanisms being applied, the same algorithms and the same approaches to sorting through, filtering the scientific literature. We're still dependent on very old technologies, right? The journal that it was published in, which is a very weak mechanism for search. So if we do more to leverage the power of the internet for search and filter, we'll improve that one. But the second point is that I actually think that openness will slow us down. And the reason that I think that is because if all of my stuff is open, and then there's more pressure on me to get it right, because you'll be able to figure out if I've been messing around. And so if I have to get it right, that means I have to spend more time on it. And I have to work a little harder. And I have to go ahead and do that replication before it is that I move on to something else. And so I think there would be an ironic effect of opening, actually making people more careful rather than less careful. You agree with this? That's good. Thank you. Yes, please.
Well, first out, pardon my English. I have one technical question about the idea of this website.
because I'm not sure whether I have misunderstood something. And scientific slide says set up your own open science framework account. Scientific journals, of course, give us insight into all kinds of research. And of course, they're not free. For example, here in Serbia, we don't have access to a lot of material because, for example, APA material because it's some sort of cashless subscription or something like that. And this website gives us much more comprehensive insight into a variety of research. And what I have not understood is it actually going to be free or what?
Yes, so very good question, and very relevant one. So has been a laboratory project. We've just been building this lab. Half of my lab is software developers. We do a lot of research online, and so we have a very technology-heavy lab. But this has been just a laboratory project. But just last month, we started a nonprofit called the Center for Open Science. It doesn't have a website or anything yet. We're going through, we have a competition for logos right now that's happening on the website. If you want to look at our possible logos, happy to show you. It has gotten funding from a new foundation in the United States called the Laura and John Arnold Foundation. And they've given us $5 million as a start to set up the center and to fund this project. And to fund open science projects more generally. So the mission is to make this stuff available and keep it free. And so from a researcher's perspective, it will always be free. Our long-term plan, in 20 years, how will we fund it? Right now, we're not worried about that so much. We just want it to survive. But the idea will be that scientific societies and journals will end up having it be in their interest to help support this. And then, perhaps nation states as well will invest part of their research monies into, if this really becomes a comprehensive system that is supportive infrastructure for science, then it'll be in the funders' interests to keep it running. So that's our long-term strategy. Thank you.
A similar question, because most of the journals are not open access. Won't they have something against works of their, the scientists who publish in their journals to publish on your website?
Yeah, it's possible that they might, but journals are going to lose this battle. So this is the Utopia 1 paper. This is what I go after, is the closed access nature of publishing. And the scientific publishers are having a hard time right now because they recognize that their business model of closing access to information, of putting up paywalls so that we can't get access to these articles, is fundamentally opposed to the central value of science, which is make it available so that people can make use of it, critique it. And so the open access model is taking over. You might know the journal PLOS 1, Public Library of Science, is short, PLOS for short. PLOS 1 is an open access journal. Public Library of Science is a nonprofit, and it's mostly publishing biological science research, but it's open to any field. So last year, my lab published 5 articles in PLOS 1, and you can get any article there. The reason I mentioned this particular journal is that it opened in 2004. It now publishes 3% of all scientific research. One journal. So it is an open access journal. It's only online. It doesn't bother with paper. And last year, something like 50,000 articles were published in PLOS 1. So it is now the largest journal by far. And that as a model is going to, in 10 years, paywalls will not exist. It is going away. So they cannot survive because these alternative models are too effective.
I have a comment
Yeah.
on that. Sorry to again.
Please.
The open access journal is great for me as a reader. It's not great for me as an author because I have to pay.
Right.
And I'm being currently reviewer of several journals that I don't want to publish in because I spend that money better for a computer in my lab. So
Yeah.
that's the flip side.
Yeah, so there are a few things that are happening on the funding model, which is the big challenge to solve. That's why it hasn't changed completely already. PLOS 1 is a journal where you pay what you can. So they have, the per paper charge is $1,350. If you don't have $1,350, then you pay whatever you can pay.
It's embarrassing. I know that the journal that I want to send a paper to would let me publish it for free if I
Yeah.
would ask for that.
Yeah,
But I don't want to.
you don't want to. I have done it in that journal a number of times because I don't have, now I have money. They gave us a ton of money. But we have been off grants for a while, and so I pay just what I can for that journal. But you're right, that is a barrier for many. There are other models, there are many different models being tried. Peer-J is another journal that's just been introduced in the biological sciences. And their model is a one-time fee. So you as a researcher pay $299, and then you can publish as many articles as you want for as long as you want in that journal. So one time, the rest of your career. So whether that model will survive, who knows? But the long-term model is for universities to shift their resources. Universities pay a ton of money for subscription fees for journals. There's very good economic analyses of if we entirely shifted from a subscription model to an author model, right, where it's open access but it's paid by the production, we would save money overall, and universities would save money overall by shifting their budgets so that you don't pay, your university pays, instead of paying for subscriptions. So the way in which that has to happen is coordination. Universities have to work together and say, in 3 years, these 200 universities are going to end all of their subscriptions to all of these journals. So, and if the top 50 or 100 universities did that, and everybody else would jump on, and all the subscription fees would go away, and they could reallocate all that money. And what do you need to reallocate all of that money to paying for subscription, for publishing fees instead? So I'll send you, if you send me an email, I'll send you the Utopia 1 article, because that's where I really hit that case. But you're right, it is a massive challenge, but it's a one that we're going to solve. We're going to solve that. We have to. Yes?
Would you think that maybe some, but it should be actually a massive action to somehow, I have the impression that makers of scientific politics are actually not scientists, or if they were, they forgot. I mean, the demands they put are, I think, half of the reasons why science doesn't look like it should be, to my taste. Like you said, you have to publish too much in short while, and you have to live on something, of course. So some of these demands are just not realistic. If you're teaching, if you have to do research, or perhaps if you have clients, if you're sick, I mean, how can you do all of this conscientiously, right?
Yeah.
You can't. And it's not that you are the one that wouldn't do it right, but the system makes you.
Right.
So
Yeah.
all the time I have the impression all the scientists unite and try, to make some longer terms. On the other hand, like you said, we don't know what the result is. When you write a project, they ask you to exactly say what you're going to get. I mean, then it's not science, it's production, right? So longer terms, more margins for some other results, not those that you wrote in the first place in the project, and also a possibility that you fail if you did it right and you failed it. Things like that, more understanding for what science really is, and that you still can get your job and not, be a beggar tomorrow. So I have all the time the impression that that's one of the things that really makes it bad.
Yeah.
That they rush you and you're under pressure, and each 2 or 3 years you have to write a new project.
Yeah.
No
Yeah,
time to
it is a
think.
real challenge because those pressures are real and they're
Yeah.
intense, and they're hard to change because we're in a high performance discipline, and so when you're in a high performance discipline, harder work ends up meaning more reward, and so it just encourages everybody to work harder, and then those who work even harder than hard are the ones that get
But
the
you
more
work harder, but to my taste, in wrong direction.
Right, and so that's where I think openness has its best opportunity, is to make it much harder to take shortcuts in unproductive ways. It doesn't fix all of the things you describe at all, but I think at least it exposes what those problems are in a way that we don't have exposed yet. Yes, please.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for this system, because not only because of scientific utopia, but because I see it as a really important source of information for young researchers such as myself. And you said that you hope that the project will survive. And I'm interested, is it spreading out of your laboratory? Are there other registrations? Are there other well-known researchers uploading their files?
Yeah, so we just moved it into public beta a month and a half ago. So, this is the first university talk I've given on it, I think. I've given it a couple small conferences, but of people that are working on these issues. So you're first. All right. But there are about 500 users right now. So there is a small community of people that are very interested in open science issues. And there's a discussion group at the Open Science Framework, and we've been talking about these, we've been doing research projects, there's lots of other things we can talk about. And so that community is already starting to use it in small ways. But the large-scale adoption is still a ways away. So for our production plans, we just got this funding for the center. We will be hiring staff this year and trying to get what exists now into candidate release, version 1.0, where we'd say this is, all of the bugs are worked out, the system is operating as it should with sort of its essential core features. It's got a much better user interface. We've still got things we want to improve in how it is, information is represented and accessible. But it's very usable now. So the initial users, we ask for lots of feedback. How can this be more useful for how you do your work? And so if you set up an account and start to use it, send us email saying, can it do this? How about do that? What about this? Because that's the information we really need as we get it to a version 1.0. And then we have lots and lots of new features that we will continue to add. And because we have funding, those features will, the usability of the system will increase very rapidly. We have our, it may be over ambitious, but we imagine it being the Facebook of science, right? Oh yeah, we'll just start this very small thing, and then everybody will be on it, and then we'll get to talk about research on cats or whatever it is we research. So it won't go like that quite, but good. Well, thank you very much.
There's no more questions. Thank you very much, Brian, and thank you for coming. It's the end of the